Thank you for coming today. My name is Jason Church. I'm with the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training. Who are we? We are a National Park Service research and training facility. We're located in Natchitoches, Louisiana. I'm told Nacogdoches is a sister city. But we do training and technology transfer with the National Park Service and for the public. We do a lot of training workshops throughout the year. I myself coordinate the National Cemetery Training Initiative. We do hands-on training. We do lectures such as this. We do training instructional videos. We do televised courses all over the country. So why do we preserve cemeteries? Do we preserve it for ourselves? Do we preserve it for the people that were there and have gone? Or to preserve it for future generations? I myself preserve it for this reason. This is something that's been there. This is a tangible record of our ancestors. It's a tangible record of the past. I want to make sure that this is there for future generations. So that leads in a lot to what we talk about later about the cleaning, about what we do and making sure that what we do is not harmful for future generations. So, why are we interested in cemeteries? What makes us want to go out and preserve this place? Right now, about the #1 reason is this genealogical information. Genealogy is the #1 and fastest growing pastime in the United States. This is, if anyone's been on RootsWeb, the website, think about what it looked like even 2 years ago. It's 20 times, exponentially larger than it was then. This is the hottest hobby in America right now, is this. Look at, go to Amazon and Google genealogy and see how many hundreds of books come up. There's whole publishing companies coming out for just this now. One of the reasons that we care about cemeteries is this information. It can be anything as simple as born and death dates to very specific, where they're from, where they went to college, what they did, where they died. Lots of information are contained here that maybe aren't contained anywhere else. The reason I got into cemetery conservation, artistic and creative values, technical values, these are pieces of sculpture. They're pieces of sculpture that are there to memorialize the dead, but they are pieces of sculpture. Make no loss that these things were carved by hand. These were worked with a mallet and chisel, just like, a lot of the artists that did these did the same pieces that we find in museums. Historic events. A lot of historic events are memorialized in cemeteries. For example, I just did the conservation work to the U.S. Arsenal Explosion Monument. This was the United States Arsenal. It was the largest non-military disaster during the Civil War. 20-some young ladies and then some odd other children and things like that died in this explosion. Mostly women and children because that's who the workforce was during the Civil War. All the men of age were out fighting. Lincoln himself unveiled this, gave the speech to dedicate it. This is an important marker for a historical event. Social values. We can learn a lot of social values from a cemetery. For example, see how fast any of you are. Can any of you see a difference between the birth date on the two markers? The large granite one is the one the family put in. The family knew when Stephen was born. The small one is a military marker. The military did not know when Stephen was born. Looked up his record and found out he had lied. He had lied so he could join the Army at 14. We don't see a lot of that now. This was a social value. This is somebody who lied to get into the Confederate Army so that he could serve. We found out he was actually, I think, 14 when he joined. Religious values. You can tell a lot about religious society from their cemeteries. For example, we have a cemetery in San Antonio here on my left, Catholic cemetery. On my right, you have a Polynesian god in Hawaii at the Island of Malachi. So, we've talked about why we want to care for cemeteries, what makes them important to us. So, after that, we want to talk about how we're going to care for them. One of the biggest problems in cemeteries is this. This is also one of the things that makes them so wonderful, the range of materials. A lot of these materials, the same treatments or the same care that work for one are harmful to another. A lot of times these materials don't interact well with each other. I've said this for years and no one's proved me wrong yet. If you can build something out of it, you're going to find it in a cemetery. You can find iron, you can find steel, brick, all stone types, wood. I've even seen a cloth grave marker made with puffy fabric paint. If it exists, you're going to find it in a cemetery. Frescoes, terracottas, it's all there. This is something you have to really worry about, is this range of materials. Another big threat to cemeteries is inappropriate maintenance and management practices. Mowers that are too large. And I'm sure I don't want to get in the way of landscape because we have Debbie coming on later. Probably the thing that changed the face of cemeteries more than any single thing is the riding mower. Before we could get a riding mower, before we could get a mechanized mower, cemeteries were a lot more elaborate. More fences, more footstones, more cribbing, more grave surrounds. A lot of these disappeared because of the mechanized mower. We hired 10 landscape gardeners to take care of it, but wait, we can lay off 5 of them and buy one of these mowers. Wait, we can lay off everyone but 2 and they can drive mowers. But it takes longer. We'll get rid of all the things other than the headstones so they can just drive right past them. And this is what happened to our cemeteries all across the U.S. Unfortunately, sometimes they're not done well, or sometimes these are just too big. And we can see in the examples here in the top photograph, most people see that and think, oh, that's a really nice vein on the marble. It's actually rubber from a tire, from a tractor tire, from one of the, not this mower, but another mower. And of course, we see a lot of rust stains. This is where the mower decks have struck them. And also we see a lot of nicks from weed eaters, things like that. One thing that's been practiced very successfully for the last few years is people putting bumpers on mowers. So either doing the pull floaties, the noodles, putting them around the bumpers of mowers, or even decking, like you put on a boat dock, the dock curbing, attaching those to mowers. And now instead of a metal surface hitting, you have a foam surface. I have a good friend of mine who runs a very large landscaping company. They do a lot of cemetery work. He had all those installed on his mowers, and every afternoon they have to inspect the mowers when they come back for the day. If any of them are damaged, you have to show your foreman where that damage occurred, and then that actually comes out of the employee's paycheck. Within about 2 weeks, in 2 years, they haven't hit a stone again. Vandalism, #1 threat that we have right now. I don't know the history of this area, if you've had any big vandalism problems. I've been out to a couple of them, hadn't seen a lot of it. But vandalism is a very big problem. Graffiti's the worst, and of course, I'll talk about more, but graffiti's the thing that we see the most. It leaves this blight, it leaves this scar. And this is something that as soon as it happens, we need to call in a professional, we need to do something about it immediately. There's been a lot of interviews done in the past to find out, they've talked to mostly juvenile delinquents, but well, why did you do graffiti? And that, well, we didn't think anyone would really care. There was already graffiti there. That's some of the answers that you hear more often. Theft. Theft's a really big issue. For example, bronze right now is the highest it's ever been. Used to, and I don't know if this is good or bad for us, probably still bad. Used to, you saw a lot of theft of all cemetery markers. Fences, gates were really popular. These were things that could be resold in garden shops. Now what you're seeing more of is the theft of any bronze elements. That has started to move away from historic cemeteries and has become a blight on modern cemeteries. All these flat bronze markers and flat vases. I get American Cemetery magazine. It's a nationwide cemetery caretakers magazine. Every month, the first 5 pages are theft articles. And it's not, they stole this important sculpture. It's, they stole 500 vases out of a Memorial Lawn cemetery, or they sold 1,000 grave markers in one night. So the cost of bronze has really put a big hurt on cemeteries. And what you see, for example, you have 2 here from San Antonio, I believe. You have a very large bronze urn, and then beside it you have the bolts were an urn that matched it from a couple, just 2 mausoleums down. And you have very sharp saw marks on this. They came in probably with a cordless sawzall, took that off. That's probably $300 or $400 worth of bronze there. Good example, I show this in every presentation I do across the country because, I don't know, I have this dream one day someone will go, I know where that is. Spanish-American War Memorial. This was stolen. That's a 12-foot granite plinth. He's a little bit bigger in life size. He's about 7 foot on top. Stolen during the day with staff on site. So you had maintenance staff there, came by 1 minute, came by about 2 hours later, he was gone. Only thing left was part of a rope and tire tracks. They think they tied a rope around him and jerked him off with a pickup. What condition he was in when he got there, we have no idea. He may have been sold for scrap bronze. That's probably a couple $1,000s worth of bronze. But as a statuary, that's probably a $20,000 or $30,000 monument to be sold on the secondary market. If we had that made today, that would be well over $100,000. So unfortunately, that'll never be replaced. Air pollution, big threat to cemeteries. And this is what you get. The effects of weathering. The little girl we see over there, she's from Cave Hill Cemetery in Kentucky. The black that you see around her is gypsum crust. This is leftover from air pollution from acid rain. The black is the gypsum crust that forms from the acid rain. It's a very porous material. It's a very sharp material that has a lot of surface area. Carbon soot from car exhaust, from coal burning things, it gets deposited in there, and that's what leaves the black crust. Once we remove that crust, what we get is, for example, this guy over here from Chicago, what I sort of call the bar of soap effect. It looks like it's just been worn away like a bar of soap. This is a big threat to cemeteries that mostly isn't caused by modern pollution. It was caused by pollution. The quality of air is much better than it was, but of course we still have to deal with these things. And there are things that conservators can do. There are consolidation treatments that can strengthen and try to keep that from deteriorating. Biodeterioration. And we'll talk more about this when we talk about cleaning and we go out to the cemetery. But what you have here in these examples is biological growth. Now, a lot of lichens and a lot of algae actually can feed on the stone, and they actually produce an acid that further deteriorates the stone. Sometimes it's nothing more than water. For example, you see here, you see the deep grooves cut in it. That's not been caused by anything but water running over the surface. So some deterioration wasn't necessarily man-made. We think about these as stone, but you have to also remember this was a piece of stone that was more than likely blasted out of the side of a mountain, blasted and pulled up from the ground. It's been struck by hammers repeatedly, carved, put on a wagon mule, or put on a barge, shipped halfway across the country, and is now weathered unnaturally in the sun for 200, 150 years. So these are really strong. They're stone, but we have to remember these things have had a really long, eventful life before we get to care for them. Inherent vice. I'm sure a lot of you Texans recognize something like over here on my left, on my right. That's actually a Texas limestone. It's great. It's easy to carve. You can get it right out of the ground, but unfortunately it doesn't hold up very well. It has a lot of clay deposits in it, and that's the end effect. Unfortunately, for me as a conservator and you as cemetery enthusiast, there's not a whole lot we can do about that. It's kind of like we made a cake, but the flour had gone bad, or we made it with bad milk. There's not much you can do. We can't really change something and still be able to eat it. We can try to slow it down, but inherent vice is probably the worst of any threats. For example, we have here, on this side, we have a slate. Slates formed in bedding planes. The bedding planes naturally want to sheet apart. If it's split between the bedding planes, we're in good shape. If it's not, those bedding planes want to separate over time. We can slow it, but there's not much we can do to stop it. And unfortunately, the side that always falls off is the epitaph. I mean, that's just how it works. Iron corrosion, we'll see a little bit of this today, but not much of it, fortunately. A lot of times ferric pins, so iron pins, either galvanized or just pure iron, were used inside of monuments to hold them together. As the water gets absorbed through the stone, the iron corrodes. As iron corrodes, it expands. Its expanding is much, much stronger than stone could ever dream about being, and it blows the stone apart from the inside. So we have to take that apart, get that iron out, replace it with stainless, put it back together, patch these holes in to try to slow down that deterioration. Invasive flora and fauna. And I didn't see any headstones, but there's some fences, and especially there's a really good example over by the church where we're going, where the tree has captured the chain link fence and it's left a really neat pattern on. Invasive flora, fauna. This was probably a great little cedar tree that was planted there to memorialize this child, and I'm sure the family had the best intentions when they planted it there, but now 100 years later, and yeah, like I said, we'll let Debbie make a judgment call, but definitely at this point the tree is more important than the little surround. A good example over here, you see a lot of this. This is a vine has grabbed a stone. You can take the stone back out of that. If the tree dies, you can take the stone. It's not worth killing the tree to get the stone out. That example, I was called in to do some consultant work at a cemetery outside of Shreveport, Louisiana, where they wanted to know, could they get the stone? We looked at it really carefully, and well, the stone wasn't actually damaged. It was just captured and being held up in the air by this. So they said, great, now that you've approved it, we're going to take the chainsaw and cut the vine, not the tree. And I had to stop him because no one had seemed to notice that's the largest poison ivy vine I've ever seen in my life. The root of it is bigger around than my body. And I said, you'll probably kill your worker if he puts a chainsaw to that, which they had in their hand ready to go. Now it is still there, and it's become part of their informative tour that they give. And of course, can't forget fauna. We have here is prairie dogs have decided to take up residence in the cemetery, which is great. The stone's thermal mass and keep them warm or cool, keeps the rain off of them. Unfortunately, they've buried under so much that all the monuments are falling in that cemetery. Disasters. Louisiana and Texas, we aren't unfamiliar with these. Floods, tornadoes, hurricanes. I think we get them all. Best thing that you can do for this is have good documentation. That's what we're going to talk about next. Have good documentation of what you had, what your site looked like before this happened. A disaster plan. One thing that is important with disasters and important with documentation is, so one of my soapbox issues is to share the wealth. So you do all this work, you do all this documentation, you do all these photographs. If you're the only one that has a copy of it, it doesn't do a whole lot of good. So what you want to do is you want to make copies of it and you want to give them to other people. Now, that's probably not your neighbor, because they won't do you a whole lot of good if this happens. We saw this a lot when Katrina hit, especially in Mississippi. We talked to cemeteries who said, well, we had the entire cemetery mapped, GIS, GPS, we had photos of everything. Great, where was it? It was in the caretaker's house. It's gone. But don't worry, our foreman also had a copy. But he lived 2 blocks away and his house is gone too. So nothing. Every 20 years worth of work, 10 years worth of work, grants worth of work gone. Send it to your state repository, give it to your local library, send it to, and I'll give you the address at the end, the Association for Gravestone Studies, AGS. It's a nationwide organization, and I'll have their website up at the end. Send it to them. They have a lending library. They're happy to take stuff. Cemetery master plan, documentation. I got a couple laughs out of that one. We can talk about documentation, condition survey, treatment plan, maintenance plan, emergency preparedness plan. All right. Hopefully some of you will be here next week. Garon Height is going to talk about documentation Texan style. He's got the Texas forms. There's an official form, which is great. You're one of the only states in the country that has that. Definitely take advantage. I think Texas has probably the best statewide organization for cemeteries in the country. So that'll be really good. Types of surveys, and we'll go through each of these. All right. So we come up on our cemetery. We're going to take on this project. We're going to care for a cemetery. It may be in our neighborhood, and we want to make it look nicer. It may be where all of our family members are buried. It may be where the relatives that we've been looking for are located. And this may be what you find in Natchitoches when you find your relatives. This may be a field grown over. What do? What's the first thing we do? Do we come in with a bush hog, clean the whole thing, and see what we've got? No. Okay. I saw some people going, I don't know. No. And I won't get into that. But the first thing that we want to do is documentation. It's the old thing, you don't know what you have until you look at it. We really want to do documentation before anything. I've worked with a lot of groups over the years who come in, they go, no. We really want to find, we know the mayor and the governor were buried here. We want to spend all of our money and restore their graves first. The rest of the cemetery looks like this. But they have no idea what's in there. The most important thing first is to find out what you have, do the documentation before you go and spend all that money trying to fix up a few other people or do that sort of thing. There's lots of types of documentation. Maybe historic documentation first. I know Debbie and I both are big fans. Look on eBay. Stereoscope cards, postcards. Cemeteries were a much more popular place. They weren't just this overgrown thing out in the corner. They were tourist attractions. There are tons. Go look on eBay. Just put in cemetery postcard. I mean, we wouldn't even think about it now. You know, you go and you look at Disney World or, Myrtle Beach, and you get postcards in there, see you at the beach kind of thing. You don't think about, well, we went to the cemetery and we bought a postcard. These were really popular. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of them out there. A lot of cemeteries made little guidebooks that you could get. Even cemeteries that aren't the big ones still have this sort of thing. Maybe family photographs. A lot of family reunions were once held in the cemetery. I've worked at places, for example, I did work at a church. They wanted to restore 3 little monuments that were almost beyond recognition. I asked, does anyone have photographs? No. Started thinking about it. They're right outside the doors of the church. I said, all right, ladies, how many here have your wedding photographs? Can I look at them? Every one of them had the grave markers in them. They were right there beside the front doors, the steps. No one knew they had photographs to the cemetery, but everyone did. We had photographs all the way back to the 20s. Oh, I've got my grandmother's wedding photos when they stepped out of the church. We'll bring those in. We had good documentation that we didn't know. So ask people if they have family reunion photographs. Maybe if it's at a church, wedding photographs. Oral interviews. Oral interviews are fantastic things. Good example, Miss Bertha Lee here. Perfect memory, better than my own. She's in her 90s. Took her out to the cemetery. We were documenting. We talked to her all about the cemetery. She knew who everybody was. No written record. She comes by and she shows me this field stone. She says, oh, this is one of my family members. Tells me all about it. So, what do we think? We see a stone marking a grave. What do we think? 100 years maybe? 50 years? About 5 years. And then you can sort of see the outline where the grave still hadn't even been 5 years. And she explains to me that this same stone had marked everyone she could ever remember in her family. When the next person dies, they all get together and they raise money and they'll put a grave on Bobby, a marker on Bobby's grave. They'll roll the stone over to the next person. She couldn't remember when they didn't do this. That stone's probably been in there, well, over 100 years, I guarantee, marking these family graves. I wouldn't have known that. If she died tomorrow, who else knows that who's under there? Oral interviews are fantastic ways to find out about. People will say, oh, well, the road didn't come here originally. That wasn't on any map. They could tell me exactly the year the road moved there and the gates moved to the other side. All right. First up, documentation. We want an account of the current condition. We can't sit around later when we've done all this preservation and brag about what it looked like if we don't say what it looked like to begin with. A record of existing materials. It is a statistical fact that the biggest time that you have cemetery vandalism is when a cemetery is rediscovered. All of a sudden, you have found this cemetery back in the woods, and everyone wants to get together. So the whole group gets together, and you put it in the paper, and you tell everybody. You have this big cleanup day, and it's fantastic. No one's been in the cemetery in 50 years. Well, the thieves are also looking at the paper going, oh, there's a cemetery on that road? Let's go check it out. That is when a lot of things get stolen, is that when it gets rediscovered and people all of a sudden are really interested in it. You want a record of existing materials. Good example, I worked in a cemetery, 1852, city-owned, always had been city-owned. City had no record of what was in that cemetery. A couple were arrested. They had driven through the South. There's a really nice, published back in the 70s, coffee table book, black and white, called The Cemeteries of the South. It's a travel guide. It has Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama in it. They found them on the 18-wheeler. The back of the 18-wheeler was filled with artifacts, and they had that on the front cover and full of Post-it notes. They had taken this book, and they had taken their own driving tour, stealing items all through the South. They were able to identify where some things came from. They owned up, well, this came from here. They cut them a deal. The FBI said, we'll reduce your sentence if you tell us where it all came from. So eventually they said, oh, we got all these gates from this cemetery, and they returned them. The only thing they had done is take all the little bronze plaques off the top that have the family names. So now we've got 25 gates and not a clue where they go. Had we had documentation, we could put all those back in a week. Be right back where we started from, secure them, and be good to go. Now these things have been sitting in storage 10 years because no one has a clue where they go. So record of existing materials, very important. Also, I've talked to people who have claimed things got stolen, gone to the police and said, well, it was a gate. Well, what's it look like? How we never took a picture of it? Well, we had these urns. What do they look like? Well, they were black. That's all we really remember. Documentation. It also helps to establish preservation priorities. When you're doing your condition survey, you have to think priority-wise. You only have a set amount of money or set amount of time, set amount of skills. What's the most important thing that's going to need conservation? Is it the one that's already fallen but has someone important and famous in it, which happens to be the case here, or the one that's very actively moving that we've got 4x4s holding it together? Which is the more important priority? Locating or creating a site map. This is an interactive GIS. Doesn't have to be anything this elaborate. I've seen fantastic maps done where they took the cemetery and they ran surveyors taping a grid over the whole thing. And everyone got in the group, volunteer group, got assigned X squares. They took grid paper, they drew it out and wrote down who was in those squares. It's a good map. It's an easy way to make a map. Didn't cost them anything, didn't have to buy any kind of specialized equipment, but they had a map. Or you could do something as elaborate as this, which you guys have maps of the cemetery that we're going to. Lots of programs available now. It can be simple. You can use GIS, GPS, all that sort of thing. We've done mapping projects where they laid out total stations and did a micrometer, centimeter, map of the ground, topography, and all that. Doesn't have to be anything that complicated. One of the things, and Garon next week will talk about survey forms and talk about how to fill those out. But you want to make sure you accurately record descriptions. Oops. Find out if you've got a volunteer group, do you all call the same thing the same thing? Does everyone know what a marble is? Or does everybody know what granite is? It's really important because you might get 20 surveys and everyone called the same marker a different thing. This is really important. I worked at a project. They had Volunteers USA come out and document the whole cemetery. It was worthless. Not 1 in 5 of those was accurate enough to even keep. So it was great. They did all this volunteer work, but it was a lot of time for nothing. If they had given a really simple lesson about how to identify stone types or what a foot marker was, what a headstone was, that sort of thing, it would have been a great project and the whole cemetery would have been documented well. Picture's worth 1,000 words. Photodocumentation. We don't want to take just one picture, we want to take lots. Details, front, back, epitaph, the whole site. Everyone now uses digital photography because it's cheap, it's easy, we all have got a computer, we can stick them on there. My only, this is my second soapbox issue I'll get up on. If you do nothing but digital photography, print it all out. Go to Kinko's, give them the CD, have them print the whole thing. Because how do we know, and as a conservationist I can tell you, we do not know how long a CD will last. 10 years maybe all your CD is good for. 20 years. We already know that CDs are deteriorating. We have data that's 20 years old that's already corrupting. They found viruses now. They found biological growth at elite CDs. CDs are not archival, nor are flash drives. These aren't archival. These may last a month. They may last a year. You don't want hundreds of hours worth of work lost and you had no idea. I spoke to a genealogical group one time and they told me they had documented their entire county, every headstone, and they had it in this great program that not a single thing they owned could read anymore. It was a DOS-based program. They were having to spend thousands to get it converted over. If they had printed everything out, they would at least had a record. So print it out, share those photographs with other people. Photodocumentation. I heard a couple there. There's good ways to do photodocumentation and bad ways. Shaving cream, not a big fan of it. Flour, chalk, not really big fans. The reason is, this is an example of genealogists doing photography using shaving cream. And if you guys don't know, what you do is you spray shaving cream on, you take a little squeegee or something, you wipe it off. It leaves the shaving cream inside all the letters. And then they're bright white and we can take a photograph, we know what it says. However, it also contains lotion, tannins, aloes, things that biological growth, you basically just smeared food all over your stone. And it loves it. And you can see what happens about a month later when you leave. Some nice biological growth just had a field day grabbing onto these things. Flour, same thing. Easy way to do photo documentation. And this can be done with one person. I usually work by myself, so I've done this. Tripod and a timer. Reflecting light back onto the headstone just with a simple photographer's, I'm sure you've all watched like the model search shows and America's Top Model, and you'll see them out there with a big reflector. Or you haven't. You can also buy the car screens to keep the light out, the silver ones. They cost like $5, $10. They work really well. Here's an example. It's kind of dark on here so you can't see it. That's nothing more than the same headstone with the light shining straight up on it with a reflector. Another really easy way to do it is take raking light, shine directly across the headstone. This works really well for concrete markers that we see that the names are inscribed on them. Works really well. Powerful flashlight. You don't have to go there at night. It makes it more fun, but it's usually illegal, so you don't want to do that. Just, good days like today that are overcast. Documentation is a great way to involve your community. Great way to get the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts in. Simple lesson. This slide was out of place. How would people describe this? Box vault, box tomb, brick box, burial vault. I've heard a dozen different names for the same thing. A simple, this is what it's called. Everyone fill out the form the same way and call it this. Identifying materials. Real simple little talk like this to help people identify which materials they're seeing. Marble versus limestone versus concrete versus zinc. For some people it seems like, oh, that's really simple. This marker is made out of metal. I have gone to plenty of places that they label those as stone. When you're doing transcriptions, really important, describe it a little better. A lot of times when people transcribe, all they have is the birth and death date and their names. There's a lot more information on this. A little off. this tells us something about this person, where they lived, that they were very religious, that they had some importance in this church. The other thing that it doesn't tell us is this is a concrete marker, all hand inscribed, and actually has ground glass pushed into to color it. That's important. That's neat. That's not something you see every day. That took some effort and artistic ability by someone. If it has mistakes, put them in your epitaph. When you're doing the transcription, put in that they misspelled it. Put that they put the letters backwards, which is kind of hard if you're on a computer. Put in quotes, write that it was backwards. You see this a lot in African American cemeteries. Color is really important. You see silvers, you see a lot of whites, a lot of blue. Write that in your documentation, take the photographs, put that it was painted. For example, we see the top one. Someone spray painted some white and then they've actually painted the lettering in. That's a flat concrete marker. There's no inscription on that. That marker was made to be repainted. Every year you had a family cleanup day. It was someone's job to paint that marker. One family moves away, family member dies, no one comes back to paint the marker. It only takes a generation, and we have no idea who was there. And then we stand around, scratch our head, and go, this was a really neat marker. Why wouldn't they put their name on it? They did. We just lost that. More paint. Also document unconventional grave markers, shells, field stones, grave mounding. One of my favorite from the cemetery we're going to, they've got 4 drive shafts around this grave marker. Now, it's for protection, but it's really neat. It's not something you see very often. You want to put that down. And of course, grave goods. Giron will talk about this too. Big fan of fencing. Don't forget it. Fences. Debbie's going to talk about plants. Things like that around a cemetery. We're not just interested in the grave markers. There are other things there that make the landscape important, make the site important. This is a really big thing for me, is the fencing and the iron furniture, that sort of thing. So maybe they have their own form. Conservation plan, we'll go through each of these. When to seek a professional. When to establish your conservation needs. Which is more important here? Maybe it's before we spend any money, we need to get the door fixed or get a door put on this mausoleum. I actually gave this talk and used this at that site, and the first thing that happened is the old lady jumped in the back and screamed at me that they had already put a door on this, which it was like, oh, I'm sorry. It had been done in the 2 weeks since I had taken the picture. Establish priorities. Decide as a site what you want to accomplish at the end. Does it have to be this pristine, everything's perfect and aligned? Probably not. Maybe your priority is just to get everything up off the ground and be happy with that. But you need to decide where you're going with it. Then you can undertake field work. Big thing is, all right, so we do all the documentation, we raise all this money, we go out, we fix up the broken things, and then we quit? What do? We need to have a maintenance plan. What's going to happen day to day? Who's going to mow the grass? Who's going to inspect it regularly? Who's going to check on it? Where's the money coming for that? If you're going to run into a site, clean the whole thing, and then leave it and let it grow back up like the way you found it, maybe there's really no reason to clean it. Maybe we go in, we do the documentation, and we call it good. So think about that. What's your long-term plan going to be? Also, emergency preparedness plan, personal safety, who's going to go check on the cemetery. 2 websites at the bottom that have information for structural repair, stabilization, that sort of thing. We saw a lot of bad things when Katrina hit, where people went into the cemetery right away, then got hurt, things fell on them, they fell in things. Probably not a good idea. Here's some more information. Probably the Texas Historic Commission one's not that important since he'll be here next week. Association of Gravestone Studies was the site I was talking about. They have a repository. Chikor Foundation has a lot of really good information on it. They're a nonprofit in Columbia, South Carolina that also does a lot with African American cemeteries.